Welcome back to another episode of Mindful Endeavors. Joining us today is Zach Jenkins from 12 Hike Challenge. Before we go on to our topics today, really quick, just remember that we're not mental health professionals. We're not advocating any kind of medical advice or anything like that. We're just having conversations, and we encourage people to also do the same. And if you do feel that you need help, we encourage you to seek it, as well as keep the conversations going. We all have people that are affected by this. So it's important to keep those conversations going so we don't stigmatize the topic. All right, so let's get into it. So you've been on the podcast before, and you're one of the people that were on it when, the technology wasn't all there. So this is kind of a redemption episode almost. So welcome back. And just again, let everybody know, what you do and everything.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. My name's Zach. I have the podcast called the 12 Hike Podcast, where we talk about basically anything to do with the outdoors. So we cover a little bit of the same stuff, some of the mental health aspects and outdoors, but then we go into more of the education side. So trying to teach people all the opportunities that are available to them in their back door, stuff they never thought of. So that's kind of what our mission's been. Excuse me. And on top of that, we just like to have fun. So the group of us, there's actually three, me and Brad and Sean. We're all avid outdoorsmen, kayak, fish, hunt. So we like to share all of our experiences with everybody too. Hopefully through our experiences, we can help other people come out of their shells and try something they never thought about doing.
Yeah. So for me, this podcast, I think the mental health thing and the outdoors, the both worlds are kind of prioritized. But it's very good that what you're doing in terms of like education, because I think that's the most important thing. Here in this podcast, we just kind of like talk about these certain activities, but we always encourage people to, get informed, get educated on whatever, on the subjects that we bring up, especially with the outdoors, because, we want to make sure that everybody practices like, fishing, shooting, or archery safely, obviously, and responsibly, most importantly.
Yeah. And I've been spending a lot of time talking to, DNR officials, people that are, game wardens and things like that. And just as a quick side note before we get started, if you're out there and you want to hunt or fish or kayak, use those people to your benefit. They're outdoors people too. They have a lot of knowledge and they want to share that with you so that you can be safe while you're doing it. It makes their job easier in the long run. So there's been a little bit of a negative stereotype of DNR officials. Try to change that. Go out and have a positive experience with them, because it's possible. All the experiences I've had been great. But use those people. They're helpful, and I've really enjoyed talking to them.
Yeah, like I said in the disclaimer, always encourage, always feel free to seek help. And I think that's a golden rule that should be applied for everything, really. Because if you want to get into anything as like cooking, things like that, anything as simple as that, don't be afraid to ask for help. There's thousands of resources available now on the internet. So even just doing that sometimes helps. But always, that's another thing too. Like we got to emphasize the importance of collaboration and also just, talking to people, the conversation.
As hard as it may be, sometimes you have to swallow your pride. You don't know everything. So most recently, I have a couple cast iron cookers, and I think I know everything there is to know about cast iron. Well, guess what? I don't. And I've a couple of my cast iron skillets stick a little bit. So my wife has been jumping in and doing the things I probably should be doing. And I've had to look at it and go, crap, she's right, I'm wrong. It happens. It happens, guys. Just suck it up and move on.
Absolutely, man. I can't even tell the amount of times that I have to swallow my pride. So it's I do enjoy eating a slice of humble pie every now and then. So it's kind of,
I don't like it. Sometimes you have to, but I don't like it.
It makes for a good story after. So I'll say that, at least from my experience. But okay, so our first topic today, farm to table, and basically just kind of going back to, I guess you could say, our roots in the sense that most cultures, they do already farm to table, and they do like snout to tail practices in terms of like how they consume food, and especially when it comes to animals.
So snap the tail. I've never heard of that. Snout. Oh, okay.
Snout. Sorry.
What my grandpa would have called eating everything but the oink.
There you go. See, like look at that. Like And see, and you know, my family like is from Mexico, and the funny thing is when we got here, we were like my mom and you know, especially specifically my mom because she was the one that was cooking a lot. She would still feed us like liver and onions, things like that, and but as we slowly you know got here, I don't know how the transition happened where now it's like okay, well we only eat like the ribeye, like the sirloin, you know, ground beef and things like that, and it's like we shied away from like the tripe, the kidney, the liver, and all that good stuff.
This is something that's kind of near and dear to me. So I've mentioned before that I drew a lot of my experiences from my grandparents, my grandma and grandpa. You know, my grandpa was born in the 20s. He grew up during the Depression. And the area of Ohio that they grew up in was not industrialized. So still a lot of farm country. And they grew up ultra poor. They didn't have electricity until after World War II. They never had indoor plumbing. And they led this lifestyle that was kind of this weird blend of the modern world and the old world kind of put together. Uh, they they spent all summer tending a garden. They raised all their own meat. The only thing they really ever bought was flour, sugar, and they had to buy ice for their ice box. They didn't have a refrigerator. They would go into town, which back then was probably, you know, it's like a 20-minute drive now, but it probably took them an hour and a half to get to town. They'd go to town. They'd go to this big building that all they did was manufacture ice. They would go in, buy their ice, and bring it back home, stick it in their ice box, and that's how they chilled things. And if they didn't have ice, they would drop like a jug of milk that they got themselves down a well. And, you know, well water's cool. It's not cold, but that's how they would keep stuff cool. So they had almost no modern conveniences. They would go out and they would butcher a hog. They would, like you said, eat everything. And they had a smokehouse and they salted all their meat. And then, you know, in the summertime, whenever the garden came on, they spent, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. I'm going to be coughing a lot, but they spent a tremendous amount of time canning vegetables, preserving them. And that's what they ate. That's how they lived. They didn't know any better.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, as the years went on, you know, my grandpa grew up, got a job, was able to afford modern conveniences. But we still carried on some of those things that they did. Every year we raised a garden. We always preserved our own food. We never bought canned corn or canned green beans, ever. We had a cellar. We kept it full of jarred vegetables and such. The butchering kind of went away. You know, my grandpa by that time was older, couldn't really get out and manhandle a hog anymore. And we lost that part of it, but we made our own cooking grease. We rendered lard. So we'd go to the butcher shop. We'd buy 100 pounds of pig fat, throw it in this big kettle, and spend a day cooking it. And that's what they used all year. They didn't buy Crisco. So, you know, this whole idea of raising a garden and feeding yourself, it means a lot to me. I don't do it now. I should, because I have all the knowledge. I know how to do it. Mm-hmm. But slowly over time, over the generations, I grew up in a world of modern conveniences. I don't have to do it. Now it's kind of like a hobby that people do.
Yeah, I mean, and I can only really speak for my experience. Like, again, from what I can remember, and even talking to my mom, like she would say, like, yeah, I used to feed you liver and onions. Like, what made you start eating liver and onions all of a sudden? I'm like, well, I found the nutritional benefits of eating liver, and I've experienced them myself. You know, and like we're talking about like good, like clean, like grass-fed, free-range, you know, liver, that kind of stuff. Not just like factory farm raised and you know poor tortured animals like that and that and
Sure.
you know, yeah, like we don't like that kind of meat is like.
I laugh. I don't mean to laugh, but it's true. The quality of meat that we get from farm raised animals versus factory raised animals is very different. And you're talking about eating liver and onions, like that's an odd thing. Let me tell you a quick story about what my odd thing is. So I go down to my grandparents for dinner, like I always did, and she had made green beans, potatoes, chicken and noodles, God knows what, it's homemade cornbread, all that stuff. and there's a pot of gravy sitting in the middle of the table. And I'm like, ooh, I got to have me some gravy. Mm-hmm. So I grab the spoon and I stick it in the gravy and I pull it up, and there's a chicken foot on the end of the spoon. Oh yeah, just hanging down, chicken foot. And I'm sitting there looking at it and I go, what? I look at my grandpa and I go, what is this? And he looks at me just deadpan, serious. He goes, oh, that's a chicken foot. Give me that. There's a lot of good meat in there. It's a chicken foot. There's really not a whole lot in there. And he took that thing, put it on his plate, and he spent the rest of the meal gumming it to death, trying to get any little bit of whatever the hell's in a chicken foot. I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. So like in a lot of those parts, like there's collagen, there's all this connective tissue that typically, like just in the mainstream, you were like, oh, gross. But in reality, there's a lot of nutrition that's jam-packed in those things.
Yeah, and I to me, I think I can trace it back to, so back when my grandpa was a kid and growing up, they had to physically work. They had a river bottom that they took care of. And I don't know, some of your listeners might not be familiar with the idea of a river bottom, but it's basically this area that borders a river. Every year it floods and it gets new silt and such on the field, makes it very nutritionally dense, easy to grow plants. That's what the Native Americans use. That's why they set up shop near rivers a lot of times, because it was easy to grow food. But him and his brothers and his dad would go down to the river bottoms, which is like a 2-3 mile walk. And they would go down, and we're talking, I don't know how many acres of cornfield, but they would have their hose and they would go through and hoe out 1 row a day. That was their goal, to get 1 row hoed for the day. They'd pack up and go back home. They ate those parts of the animals for the exact same reasons you just said. They were nutritionally dense. They packed all that fat and that high energy food in there. And then their bodies craved it. That's what they needed.
Right.
And I mean, you experience the same thing if you go out and spend a day doing, really hard labor, go out and exercise or whatever. Whenever you get home, you want to eat everything in your path. I know I do. After a day of kayaking, nothing's safe. I'm going to eat everything in the house.
Yeah. Or even like if you move like residencies, like, or help somebody move, like at the end of the night, you're just like, give me anything and everything. Like, it's like, but and I found that like, for example, eating a steak that's grass fed is a little bit tougher to like eat versus like just corn fed factory raised like New York or whatever steak. And I mean by tougher, I mean by like finishing it, because it's just it's more nutrient packed.
Sure.
So I don't know, like for me specifically, like, again, I can only speak for myself, and I have talked to other people that have kind of shared the same feeling, in the sense that it just feels like it's just filling up your stomach more. So that one piece of steak is good enough. Whereas like the corn-fed steak, I had to eat that steak plus maybe half of another one, and then maybe like some sides here and there. Whereas like with this one steak, I can eat that and maybe a little bit of like carrots or some kind of like kale or something like that, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that's kind of overlooked. So in my experiences with canning vegetables and putting stuff up, whenever we would say put green beans in a jar, right? We would go out into the field, pick them, bring back in, wash them. We would break them, and then they would go into a glass jar with water and then a pressure cooker. There was no preservatives. The only thing that preserved the green beans was being in a high heat environment and pressurized. Mm-hmm. So they sat in their own juices. They sat in a cellar, and we canned what we could use in a year. So by the time the next gardening season came around, you were ready to replenish your stocks. When you get a jar of green beans from the grocery store, try reading the label for the ingredients, all the preservatives and all the sodium and salt and things that are added in there to keep it good for 3-4 years, however long a can of green beans is good for. Same thing with cheese. Do you buy shredded cheese?
Like no, because it has that wood, what is it, that wood pulp that they put in it so it doesn't like cake or whatever, it doesn't stick.
I had no idea that stuff was in there. So One day my wife says, hey, let's try buying a block of cheese and we'll grate our own. And my lazy self was like, I don't want to spend 5 minutes grating cheese. That's stupid. You can buy it pre-grated. Well, after the first time of grating my own cheese, we haven't bought shredded cheese since.
Yep.
And the difference is visible. People, whenever you shred cheese on your own and melt it, it actually melts.
It melts a lot better. Yep.
And I think my grandpa lived to be 94, and he ate, I think, what any fitness coach would consider a garbage diet. Any piece of fat he ate, like he wouldn't eat a pork chop that was trimmed. It had to have an inch ring of fat around it, and he ate the whole thing. I wanted to puke, but he ate it. We used pig fat for cooking oil. All these things that we're told, don't do that because you will die. Well, he lived to be 94 years old, and he died of prostate cancer. He had to have a carotid artery cleaned up, but other than that, he was fine. His heart was great. None of his veins were collapsing. He was 86 years old, and we were building a house.
Yeah, and the point that kind of ties into the whole farm to table situation is the convenience. I think we lost a lot of that because of convenience. You look at TV dinners and how they've how they evolved from. I think the first one was like in the 50s, maybe a little bit earlier than that, like during the Depression, because and I get it during that time, like the need to feed people in the most convenient, the most cheapest way you can possibly think of, because things were tough. I get that. There's nothing wrong with doing it for that amount of time, but then it just kind of carried out from there. And then we had fast food, and then fast food transitioned into making it more efficient and all that stuff. So more efficient in the sense that more calorically dense, but less nutrition, less nutrition in it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you had the United States in a post-World War II economy. Things were booming. Industry was great. And like you said, conveniences started to happen. So you had the stay-at-home wife who could cook a dinner, and it was just easier for them to go out and buy prepackaged food. My great-grandma, if they wanted a chicken, she had to go out and wring one's neck and slaughter it and bring it back in.
Right.
You don't see very many promotional pieces from the 50s. Housewives going out and chop. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I couldn't make my wife. I don't even think she'd touch a chicken, to be honest with you. But
yeah.
We've lost that drive to go out and do something challenging. And let me tell you something: raising a garden is challenging. It's hard to do it right.
Oh yeah, but the incentive with raising your own garden, or even just having some chickens in like a small little yard, the incentive for that is basically you're almost printing your own money, because the amount of food that you're growing, it's going to offset the amount that you have to spend in the grocery store.
So it's an interesting thing. So I did a podcast with a place called Willowit Ranch. They're up in Oregon, and they're like an educational working ranch. So you can schedule a trip or a vacation to go out there, stay in their cabin, and you go out and garden while you're there. And, they brought that up, and my comment was, my idea of a vacation is not gardening. That sucks. That's work. And, she kind of chuckled and said, well, people on the West Coast, they think it's a real treat because they don't get to do this stuff. The idea of going out and growing your own food is foreign to them. And they said their experience was shaped by going to Europe. I guess, like you had mentioned earlier, other cultures still garden all the time, and that's just part of their normal everyday thing. And she said that's the way it is over in Europe. They do a lot of gardening and raising their own food.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing from the area where my family's the area where my family's from in Mexico. It's definitely a thing. It's still there in certain parts. I mean, you still have the city, but the farmland is not too far away. It's just, I mean, a lot of people even nowadays don't know how food gets to the grocery store. Like that's the scariest part of all the things, because you're looking with like food shortages. Wow, I don't know why I'm stuttering so much. Food shortages.
I have that effect on people. I intimidate people, I guess.
It's one of those days. I don't know, but so anyway, we're talking about food shortages, and they're just, some people like legitimately just like I know they believe it because they just think, oh well, the food will get back up there eventually, and like, do you have any idea where the food is coming from? Like the food supply is being choked down to the point where we can't get in the grocery store. And it's like, well, what's the big deal? Just go ahead and buy some more this and that. I'm like, you can't just like, it doesn't come out of thin air. It's like there has to be labor in it. There has to be land that all that food comes from the land.
Well, you say that it doesn't come from anywhere, but that leads to a couple of interesting points. So here in Colorado, we did a recent thing called Meatless Monday, where the governor encouraged everybody to skip eating meat for a day. Well, the counter to that was a Meat Monday, so everybody ate meat on a day. But that leads to the point of, there's a lot of talk about manufacturing meat, lab-grown meat.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's a very scary thing. One, who knows what's in it? What are the side effects of it? What's the nutritional value? Is it going to be nutritionally dense, or is it just a filler? I mean, who knows? But I don't like the idea of it.
Yeah. Again, that's part of the convenience, right? Because we have the science to allow us to do that now. And I have the opinion that I don't necessarily want to go to that as well, because I've talked to farmers, I've seen farmer documentaries, I've seen other research that is not really so well known, where it's like you look at like the actual like farming, like holistic farming, how much carbon you pull out of the air, how much like plants you can grow off of that, and also most importantly, how the ecosystem thrives off of just, even in those little patches of like farmland. Like there's an ecosystem there, and these are actual living ecosystems. And I think they can definitely provide a lot of food for sure. And it's also really upon ourselves and how to like, we got to control food waste, because even right now we have a crap ton of food, but a lot of people don't really have access to it because it goes to waste for whatever reason, and we can talk about that in a different time. But
I mean, I'm guilty. I'm guilty of food waste. We throw away food all the time.
And then when I grew up here, again, I was born and raised in the United States, and from my experience growing up here, we never wasted anything. It was one of those things where whatever's on your plate, you finish it. If we had leftovers, sometimes we invite people over to, for a little meal or whatever, but we never wasted anything. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the concept of like farm to table, because, farm to table, you eat what you grow, you don't just throw it away, right? Like it goes hand in hand with that. So I think in terms of like your point of like lab raised meat, I honestly am optimistic that it's not going to take effect very well. I mean, in small sectors, because I do see a push to go more towards farm to table.
Mm-hmm. And I think you see that from the people I've talked to, this idea of having some kind of organic food source where they know where everything's coming from. But that runs counter to something else that I'm very accustomed to, which is hunting. If you want to know something about where your food comes from, be a hunter, because I can look out my window here and I look up at the Rocky Mountains. There are elk, mule deer. I've got pronghorn on the plains. If you want a natural, like a superfood, an animal like that is the way to go.
Right.
I grew up eating small game, squirrels, rabbits, stuff like that. The meat, the quality, I never had a bad squirrel, ever. I've had a bad steak, but I've never had a bad squirrel. And I mean, those little critters are everywhere. They're here. We pay for them already in taxes. We try to conserve them. But, for people that, are all about eating a steak, but then they yell at a hunter because, oh, that's one of God's precious animals. To me, that's counterintuitive. You don't know where that steak came from.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. And I definitely kind of feel the same way. Just really quick to wrap up the farm to table, because that is another topic of discussion, like hunting, just like the benefit from farm to table. And I know we use the word farm, but like even sometimes like I've in an apartment, I was able to grow strawberries out of a bucket. Like, like we can do small things like that at least offset our need for the grocery store. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand also with mental health, because when you look at like if you eat really well, like you feel good. Like I'm not talking about necessarily like like six pack and all that stuff. Like no, just like eating well, like
sure.
You eat good food and all that stuff. And
I mean, I guess the other part about that is the sense of self-worth. If you look at
Yeah.
your bucket of strawberries and you go, I did that. I raised those things. It makes you feel really good. It was a good feeling walking through a cornfield and seeing all these big beautiful ears of corn, and you snap one off and you go, man, I remember hoeing this plant and caring for it. I planted it. I put that seed there.
Yeah.
That sense of accomplishment is real, and
Yeah.
it sucks spending a week shucking corn and breaking beans and doing all those things. But at the end of that week, you can look in your pantry and go, "Oh man, I did all that."
Yeah, and like honestly, like you talked about gardening, right? I mean, gardening is also a chore. I mean, not chore, but it's also work, but it's also very therapeutic. And if you're already doing that as as a form of therapy, why not just plant basil? Why not plant cilantro? Why not plant, I don't know, maybe cucumbers or a small little tomato plant, like stuff like that. Like if you're already like farming for therapy, why not farm to provide some kind of nourishment, right? So, and
I think I'm guilty of it just as much as anybody. When you think of a garden, people really want to go all out and plant a big bunch of stuff, um, and try to really maximize their output. When in reality, doing a garden could be something as simple as just like you have a bucket of strawberries in your apartment. That's gardening. Try not to get overwhelmed with the idea. So if you want to do a garden, something that one of our co-hosts, Sean, what he's recently started doing is making raised garden beds. So you basically make a rectangle out of lumber, fill it with dirt, and then you plant, a handful of plants in there. And care for those plants, get the stuff off of them, and then slowly over time build that up. And eventually you'll have a full functioning garden.
yeah, and again, farm to table doesn't necessarily mean you need a 1 acre, 2 acres worth of farmland. Like it just means that I mean, at least the way I'm seeing it now is like it means you're growing it, so you know where it comes from, you know what went into it, you know the amount of time that it took to create it and to bring it to your home. So there's a lot of benefits to that, which is how we're going to wrap this point up is that there's a whole therapeutic benefit of actually planting and hoeing the seed and everything, growing the seed and watching it grow, and then there's also the benefit of having some food on the plate or having some other form of nutrition in you so that you can feel better and you can go along with your life. But
No.
yeah.
And I mean, if you're looking at the therapy in the outdoors, we're going to go ahead and start talking about hunting. I mean, that's about as therapeutic as it gets.
Yeah, we're segueing into our next topic, which is because like we talked about farm to table, but there's also something I kind of feel like I don't know if it's coined yet or anything like that, but I feel like it's basically the whole thing called like wilderness to table, where it's like you're going out and hunting your food. I've seen a lot of push towards that, especially when you're looking at like COVID and how that exposed how weak our food supply is, and most of that I honestly think it's due to centralization. But case in point, yeah, it definitely showed how weak our food supply, and a lot of people have gone into hunting that weren't necessarily big hunters before.
Yeah, and let's I guess we'll go ahead and preface this whole conversation by saying wilderness to table doesn't necessarily exclusively mean going out and shooting an animal and eating it. April, May, is right around the corner. It's just here in a couple weeks. That's prime time mushroom season, so wild mushrooms are going to be growing. If you've never had a wild mushroom, I highly recommend going out and finding some morels or like a chicken of the woods, big hardy mushroom. They're delicious, and they grow wild for everybody to get. There's wild asparagus, wild onions. There's a whole segment of the population that foragers. They're not just hunters. They go out and forage blackberries, blueberries. Those things are great, and they're super healthy. There's no pesticides, and they're there. They're just there for the picking.
I mean, sometimes you might have to compete with an animal, but I mean, there is that is a thing. So don't just go in there thinking that they're there for you, and nobody else is going to be like, "Oh, hey, I see a berry. Here comes a bear," and
be safe.
Yes. I talked about this in another podcast episode where we kind of see like people like they get a misrepresentation of nature. So when they go out into the wilderness, he's seen accounts of like people that actually try to approach a wild animal and doesn't turn out really well for them. So as always, whenever you explore nature, the outdoors, be respectful, be safe, get as much information as you possibly can, especially with foraging, because, like I've heard stories from, I used to work with this person that used to forage for mushrooms a lot, and he kind of gave me a little bit of info on that. But he would tell me, like, you gotta know what spores are poisonous, what spores are not, and there's a certain test that you do with like a piece of paper, like to kind of see that. And I can't really discuss any further because that's what I remember hearing. I don't remember the details of that, but there's a lot of knowledge that you need to acquire before you go out and pick a berry, pick a mushroom, and things like that.
Yeah, I think foraging is a lot different than just going out and hunting, because you're right. There are berries out there and mushrooms out there that can kill you. So I guess please, like he prefaced on the beginning, research a little bit. But there are whole books that are dedicated to the morphology of different plants and vegetables. So just do some research. Find someone who maybe has been mushroom hunting before. For me, I always just pick morels because I know they're safe. I know exactly what they look like. But that's the extent of my mushroom knowledge anyway.
Yeah, I definitely made some cream of mushroom with morels that were, because again, that buddy of mine, that coworker of mine, shared some with me, and they're the best tasting mushrooms I've ever had. And it's like that sparked my like appetite for mushrooms, and ever since then, this was like 3 years ago, maybe 4, and ever since then, it's just been like, now I'm like all about mushrooms, just because this is what a mushroom really, really tastes like, and it tastes really delicious.
They're so good. And when you look out in the woods, especially growing up in the foothills of Appalachia, we dug all kinds of roots and stuff. So we had bloodroot, yellow root, ginseng, all medicinal roots. So if you had a stomach sore or an upset stomach, my grandpa would pull out a few yellow roots, boil them, make a tea with them, and then basically you drink dirt water because that's what it tastes like.
Right.
Your stomach sores would go away. Your pain would go away. People need to understand that there are things out there that probably most of us have forgotten about, but they're really beneficial to our health.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because like, that's another thing that we've lost. Like we've gotten convenience with like cities, suburbs, and, especially the technology making things a lot more, I guess, was it efficient? Maybe more convenient for us.
Definitely convenient.
Yeah, because I mean, you look at like microwaves. Microwaves like super convenient. You heat something up in like 30 seconds in an hour. But I told recently a friend of mine, because I made her chicken wings because I like to cook a lot. I made her some chicken wings, and the very first thing I told her, like, do you have an air fryer or do you have like what is it? One of those little ovens, like convection ovens. There you go. Do you have one of those available? She's like, all right, well, convention oven. All right, cool. Use that to warm up the chicken wings, because you throw them in the microwave, the very first thing, they're going to dry out. Second thing, they're going to lose all the seasoning. That's the reason why. I mean, I'm not sure how many people actually know this, but that's the reason why when you look at like prepackaged foods, like ready to eat meals, like, that you just have to pop in the microwave for like 3 or 5 minutes, those meals come with a lot of sodium for that specific reason, because after going through the nuking process that is the microwave, and that sounds a little bit worse than what it really is, but the nuking process will basically dry out, and some of that sodium will get out of it. So in order for it to still taste good, you have to load it up with a ton of sodium before it even hits the microwave.
Yeah, and that's so unhealthy. When I look at what I eat versus, we'll say, what my neighbor eats. My neighbor's an ad hunter, always has been. He's a guy that I talked to him. I don't know, when I first moved here, we were talking about hunting and stuff. And his comment was, I haven't bought meat from a grocery store in 14 years. And I said, wow, what? He goes, awesome. Yeah, no, he said, come here, I'll show you something. So he brought me over to his house and he opened his freezer and he's got all these butcher wrap bags full of bear, deer, pronghorn, trout, just stuff that he has went out and shot. He said, this is what I eat all year. And, prime example, Super Bowl Sunday, my stupid rear end's over here making a pizza. And he sends me a text, says, hey, come outside for a second. So I go out to my fence and he hands me over this aluminum foil package. Says, here, eat this. And I brought it back over, and it was a moose steak from a moose that he had shot. He had already grilled it, marinated it. It was ready to eat, just in this foil package. So I open this thing up, and it's this beautifully cooked moose steak. I cut it open. It's kind of like this. This is a perfect medium rare, and it was one steak. It was only maybe like a standard ribeye. What's a 6 ounce?
A standard ribeye is about anywhere from 8 to 14 inches. I mean ounces.
Okay, this thing was maybe 6 ounces. I struggled eating it. It was so much different. He's brought me over bear sausage, and I like you mentioned, I struggled to eat the same amount of that kind of meat than I do like a standard meat. I could crush like a 12-ounce ribeye, but this little moose steak had me struggling. Matter of fact, I've had some of it to the dog because I couldn't eat it.
Oh yeah, and honestly, like I'm glad that you had that experience, because like I've talked to so many people that, I mean, and my experience has been with like grass-fed, like truly, really like pasture-raised like cows, and I've had that experience almost every time. I just can't finish the meat. Like I can eat like 8 ounces of like ground beef that's like conventionally raised like that, and it'll just will go through me real quick. Whereas like the same 8 ounces, I'll actually slow down because my stomach is telling me like slow the heck down. Like there's a lot. We're still processing this. Yep. There's so much stuff to process here. So
and and back to the point of knowing where your food came from. Those animals that are out there, they don't eat bad things because it's not in their best interest to eat something that's going to harm them. Mm-hmm. So they go out and eat, grass, sage, in the Midwest, corn and soybeans. They're incredibly healthy animals because their life depends on it. So in an animal that's diseased, is going to be very obvious that animal has something wrong with it, and you're not going to harvest it because it's got something wrong.
Right.
But this moose steak, back to the moose steak, when you get a medium rare steak, it's kind of pink in the middle, right? I mean, it's pink, definitely, not like red. Well, this steak I cut open was the collar of your shirt. It was like mahogany. Red. Yes. I wasn't ready for that. I thought, oh God, he's trying to make me raw moose. But no, when you cook that stuff to the right internal temperature, it is this deep, rich collar. And I showed it to my mom, and she said, oh my God, you need to cook that thing longer. And I was like, no, it was perfect. That's just the color that it is. And when you shoot an animal and you bring it back to your place, you do a couple things. One, you're handling that animal from beginning to end. You know that you're using sterile tools in a sterile environment, and you're getting your meat, the stuff that you shot. Two, you can really see what that animal is all about. On a mule deer here in the Rockies, there is little to no fat because they spend such a hard life climbing up and down the mountains. Their muscles are, there are muscle groups on a hind corner of a deer, and you can see them. I mean, you cut them out. You know exactly what those parts are. And then the makeup of the meat, it's so dense and so rich. You don't need to eat a pound of whatever. For me, if I ate my whole family could probably eat a half a pound of deer sausage, and we'd all be dying. We'd be stuffed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where like there's misconceptions to that, right? Because people see like somebody that eats a lot of meat, and a lot of it's like conventionally raised or whatever, and it'll have some nutrients. It's not going to be like complete crap, and it'll nourish a little bit, and then there's definitely the caloric intake of that. But when you actually like eat like really, really good quality animals, like the amount of meat you're going to eat is going to go down, which is kind of what has led me to believe that, when you look at certain studies that like, oh, meat causes cancer, it's like, well, I mean, you're already taking into the fact that the conventional raised animals may not necessarily be the best quality, but also if that really is correlated with eating a lot of meat, if we go back 100, 200 years, 300 years, we probably ate less of it. That's probably why we didn't really have a whole lot of issues back then, because, like you said, the 6 ounces of moose steak was more than enough for that particular meal.
Yeah, I think another interesting thing when you go back and look at history, I think scientists are starting to look at how efficient, ancient Indians really were at harvesting an animal. They tend to think that now they were more of a scavenger type. So if they saw a big animal that had already died, they would take off of it what they could and then supplement that, with their successful kills. Paleo Indians in particular, you got to think about an Indian running around with a stick that had a sharp rock on the end of it. One, you have to be super stealthy to get close to an animal. And two, if you got that close to a big animal, the odds of getting hurt were really high. So what was the likelihood that they, like you said, they were really eating that much meat? And then on top of that, I think you have to take into consideration our modern lifestyle. Most of us are pretty sedentary. We don't go out and work off those calories we consume.
Exactly.
So, and that's the other added benefit of going out and hunting. Hunting is a lot of work. You spend, a month or two scouting. You spend all that time sighting in your rifle to make sure you get a clean, ethical kill whenever the time comes. The time dragging that animal. Like, hunting is 99% work for that 1% of pulling the trigger. Pulling the trigger is the easy part. Anybody can do that. But to go out and put boots on the ground and beat those mountains to death, it's hard. It got to a point last year I wanted to cry. I had spent a whole morning hiking through the woods, and by the time I got close to the trail, I had one more hill to hike. And I remember looking up at it and going, I don't think I can do this. So I stood down there and had myself a little bit of a pout, took a couple steps, and I eventually make it back to the car. But
well, I mean that's another misconception too, that people think that you just go out into the land and you're just going to see a deer, boom, shoot it. No, especially on public land. I know that on public land, sometimes you have to go 10, 15, even 20, 25 miles deep before you even have a chance of even seeing an animal. You might not even see it still.
Yeah, my experience has been, there are a lot of guys that'll drive some of these trails, some of these off-road trails, and they'll hunt from the trail. If you spend the time to get 2-3 miles off the trail, and you know where you're hunting, you can usually get into some animals. But the point's well made. You can't just expect to drive up onto an animal, shoot it, throw it in the back of your truck, and go home.
Yeah,
and that's a terrible misconception. And the other misconception about hunters is that we're all fuds. That we got their guns blazing and just shoot everything. That's not the case. Most hunters that I know that are ethical, we go out, we get our hunter safety certification, we buy our licenses, we buy our tags, we hunt our animals within our season, and if we're not successful, you eat a tag. I mean, that's the way it goes. And I ate 2 or 3 tags last year.
Yeah, and for those listening and watching, eating tags basically means that you can't reuse that tag for the animal. You basically spent $500 for an opportunity of shooting one. If you don't get anything, that's it. You don't get those $500 back.
Yep. $500 for non-resident. I think I was $30, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just throwing a high number just because I know there's for specific animals. It's, the tag is not the same. It's not $5 for anything from a squirrel up into a moose. No, it depends because, like you said, there is a lot of conservation aspect into hunting, which that is what drives up the price of the tags up specifically. I mean, I know at least that much. I've never hunted, at least not yet myself. Yeah. I'm going to, and that's why I'm kind of practicing archery. And I mean, I have my bolt action as well in case I want to go that route. But I've been researching. That's this whole last 2 years since I've decided hey, I want to give hunting a try. It's mostly been research, and the misconceptions that you see a lot is astonishing because you look at trophy hunting gets confused with poaching, then market hunting gets confused with just getting an animal and bringing it to your table and for nourishment for 6 months, almost a year, depending on how much meat you can eat and depending on the size of the animal, right?
Right.
And that's another thing too, that people think that, oh, I'm going to shoot this deer. I'm only going to take the ribeye and all that stuff. And then, well, all right, 2 weeks later, I need to go get another deer because I'm hungry again. It's no. And it goes back to what I was talking about, the whole farm to table aspect where we're talking about snout to tail. It goes back to that. you get one animal, you utilize it because it gave its life. You utilize it to the best of its abilities because it gave its life for you to eat. Granted that, there's people there that say like, well, you can probably just get away with just eating eggs. And sure, I mean, if that's suits you, it's fine, but it's not a one size fits all, especially when it comes to nutrition. It's very, very detailed. Same thing with mental health. Like it's not a one size fits all. So, so like that's the misconception that I've seen a lot because, they get those terms all mixed up and it's not the case.
It's easy to do. I mean, technically, we're kind of all trophy hunters. Our trophies might be different. A freezer full of meat is still a trophy. That's something you can be proud of. And my tags that I'm getting this year, I'm getting a buck and a doe tag. And let me tell you something. If I see a buck, I'm not going to go, I don't want that one because it has antlers. It is getting shot because, that's another way that as a hunter, you kind of cherish that animal. Every time you see that rack of antlers, you can go, I can remember every single thing that led up to that deer. And you're honoring it. Now, whether my wife will let me put a deer head on the wall is yet to be determined. I've got a whole basement here that I will festoon with antlers if I have to, but that's not the point. The point to me of a good hunter is going out, getting your fill, and leaving the rest for everybody else. Poachers are, to me, some of the lowest of the low. Going out and shooting an animal, cutting its head off, and leaving the rest there is selfish. It's highly criminal. I mean, that you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, I agree. And the one thing that people don't really know, at least because it's not in the mainstream, when you look at like trophy hunting in Africa, first of all, a lot of it's trophy hunting because we can't bring back the meat because of customs. Because I mean, a lion, I've heard people eating lion out in Africa. I've heard people eating giraffe, and all that's good meat as well. But most importantly, some of the like, again, based off the tags, some of that money goes to hire people to shoot poachers.
Yep.
Because for the same reason, like, I mean, it's all one thing circles, whether you treat it as a business or it's just like encompassing the entire like circle of life or whatever. Like poachers destroy all that, whether it's a business or the circle of life, they destroy it. And that's the common ground between those two, I guess, industries, if I guess you can call them that.
Sure.
But, some of that money for conservation goes to people to basically shoot on site for these poachers because, again, they're destroying the ecosystem and destroying the business to a certain degree because that business to them feeds a lot of the community and all that stuff. And, we just see it as like, oh, this person just shot a lion or whatever. And we don't really know that, which kind of, is a good transitioning point to the last topic, and that's negativity on the internet. And, which again, detrimental to someone's mental health, regardless of whether you're a hunter or not, right?
Yep. And people can say whatever they want to about hunting. The conservation efforts are irrefutable.
They really are.
And leading up to the whole internet pressure thing, it's really easy to go on the internet and anonymously type some kind of, oh, you're a lion killer. We love lions. But they don't see, like you ran off all this list of stuff that tag does for that community. They don't see everything that goes into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like, I'll start off with this example. Like, I see, cause I mean, again, now I'm following hunters. Now I'm actually reaching out to people, anybody that responds back to me, to my questions, right? Like in terms of like the hunting world and stuff. And I see sometimes on their profiles, I see like somebody posting a picture of a deer antlers, right? And very first thing you're like, you're a horrible person for, hunting these deer, shooting these deer, and how dare you like brag about the antlers? And it's like, well, if you actually paid attention and you actually, and I mean, I'm not trying to discourage anybody like that's misinformed. Like it's just, just saying like, if you actually like pay attention and you actually like know, like, a lot of those antlers just naturally fall off their head because that's just what they do. That's part of their life cycle. That happens like for main season. If I'm saying that correctly, like
Yep.
By the time new main season comes, they grow a new set of antlers, and
Yep.
they fall out naturally. Nobody's cutting them off.
Yep.
But it's
The efforts that their bodies take to maintain those antlers, it's not worth it to keep them all year. So they
right.
drop them where they're not important, and then, like you said, they grow new ones every year.
Yeah, and that's the thing that a lot of people don't really see, but they're really quick to comment on a profile and it's on somebody's picture because they see the antler and they think, oh, well, this guy just shot an animal just to cut off his antlers. It's like, no. You got to understand their biology. That's what they do. That's their biological function. Like, like that's, one of the things where like, I think the reason why there's a lot of negativity on the internet is because there's a lot of impulse and there's a lot of, that's coupled with a lot of like misinformation or uninformed individuals or whatever. And those, I know they have negative connotations, but it's not necessarily bad. It's only bad if you are not willing to inform yourself.
Impulse is such an interesting word to use because it is an impulse. You see something on the internet and it immediately triggers some kind of reptile response. And I'm not guilty of it so much anymore, but I used to be really quick with some kind of response, based on my experiences. And it takes a lot of work to fight that reaction impulse, to look at something and go, that person has a different thought than me, and just keep on scrolling past, because it's not worth it to get involved in that kind of mess. For me personally, an example, I posted something from the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. They were talking about their hunter conservation efforts, the money that they raise, how they help manage elk herds and have grown elk herds exponentially from when they were at their lowest. And I had a Facebook follower that went ballistic. You guys can F right off of my news feed. I can't believe you're hunters. This is bull crap. And my first impulse was to give that lady what for. I was going to really lay into her. Then I thought, no, she has a different set of experiences than me and doesn't understand what a good ethical hunter is all about. Mm-hmm. So I gave her an open invitation to come on the podcast, and it was crickets, nothing. She didn't respond. She didn't want to hear that side of the story.
Yeah. So that's kind of the thing that we're getting at too, because like we need to really be open to information. And it's not to say that anybody's trying to change your mind on anything. Like it's just hearing the information. And we need to, I think that kind of is associated with us having a shorter attention span, and maybe like our identity, our ego is probably growing more and more, and like I think that's really what it comes down to, because I've met a few people that are like, okay, I understand why people hunt. I personally don't want to date a hunter. That's perfectly fine. Yep. Honestly, that is 100% fine. And I respect that 100%, because you need to be with somebody in a relationship that shares your similar, values and such. And, it's like, that's a very healthy response. Like, hey, like I understand why people hunt. I personally don't want to hunt for whatever reason. Whether it's emotional, whether it's factual, whether it's prior experience or whatever, like we need to understand those things, because it goes both ways, right? Like it goes both ways as to like why, like you need to respect like somebody that hunts for food, hunts for everything they eat, because that's how they grew up with, and they feel more in tune with nature, and it can be therapeutic for somebody, like just being more like involved into the, what's it called, the biosphere, because that's the other thing that like this whole thing about commercializing meat has taken away as well. It's like we're no longer like within the biosphere as much. Like so we're just like, we see pictures of nature from, sometimes if we're lucky, from other influencers, most of the time from like pictures that you see like screensavers and stuff like that, and we think that's what nature is, but in reality you have two bucks trying to kill each other over a doe.
Mm-hmm. Nature's brutal. I don't know, a lot of people know this, but deer will eat baby birds. Like if they fall out of the nest and a deer's around, they're done. They're had. So deer aren't this beautiful, graceful Bambi type creature all the time. They can be pretty rough. And having that realistic expectation of what nature really is, we've gotten so out of touch with it. Right. Zoos, national parks. Like, I don't know if you've seen the video or not, but there was a family that was, I think they were in Yosemite, and there were some buffalo walking across the road, right? Well, they rolled their window down so their kid could get a better view of the buffalo. And that thing headbutted that kid like through the other side of the car. It was crazy. It was the craziest video I've ever seen. But
I've seen it, yeah.
You watch that and you go, it's a wild animal. What do you expect?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely, that's kind of where like we need to kind of have more information so that when we do go to a zoo, we're like, okay, this is more of a controlled environment. They may not necessarily interact the same way with you out in the outdoors on the, the wilderness and such, because, they're in a controlled environment. And like, I'll give another example to, your buffalo example, like giraffes. You look at giraffes and like giraffes for some odd reason, like even out in the wild, they are very, very partially humans in the sense that they're willing to actually interact with humans.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see like those, what is it, like, I guess petting zoos, I think.
Yeah.
Where like you just kind of like stand on a like tall stand and you wait for the giraffe to come and you feed it leaf.
Mm-hmm.
People get that like interpretation like, oh, this is a very sweet animal, like all this stuff. But then when you look at it in the wild, you look at what happened in a certain conservation area where you had one bull giraffe killing all the other younger male giraffes because they didn't want any of them to mate with any of the female giraffes.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very detrimental to the survival of that species, because if there's not enough people to diversify the gene pool, then, and even then, like that old male giraffe was not reproducing anymore.
No, he was out of his prime.
It's out of its prime. So it couldn't really reproduce. So it's like, it's one of those things where like, okay, so what's the more efficient thing? Like sometimes you have to set a tag for it, because at least versus you just kind of like the people that are there at the conservation place, like versus them just shooting the animal. We're like, well, let's get some money so we can keep funding the conservation efforts. We'll put the tag on it. So,
and just like you mentioned before we started recording, the internet's a great place. It's full of information. I think as a society, we've been driven to this whole, you're either on one side of the coin or the other.
Right.
There's no room for discussion in the middle. And that's sad, because I know a lot of people that have different views than me, but we can still have discussions. And I think those discussions that happen in the middle are critical. And it's hard to have an internet discussion. Twitter, you only got 140 characters. How do you talk about a complex issue in 140 characters? You lose even an email where you can send someone a freaking story if you wanted to. They don't get your inflection. They don't get your tone. They can't tell sarcasm. So like if you're trying to type sarcasm, sometimes it comes off as being a butthole, And I think that's one of the things that the internet has really been detrimental for, is while it's opened up avenues of communication, it hasn't improved our communication skills.
Yeah, kind of to a certain degree, it deteriorated our communication skills, because instead of like something that would add levity, it adds severity because of the way the person took it.
Mm-hmm.
Now that person reacts to what they think is severe, and then it goes from there.
Even the skills of having a conversation. As I was graduating college, I was mid-20s, whatever. A couple years later, they started introducing communication classes where they would teach people how to have conversations. And that was such a foreign thing to me. I grew up, running around and meeting new people all the time. And I learned to talk to anybody. Having a conversation is not a problem. But there's a whole generation. We'll take maybe my kids, for example. They're 4 and 6. They were born and raised on technology that it's all text messages. And they don't have any face-to-face communication anymore. Mm-hmm. That's a skill that they're going to have to learn. And I take it for granted.
It's kind of crazy that, we look at how far like speech has gone from like, when you look at like, evolution from a anthropological sense, and look at where we're at. And then I think to a certain degree, there's points to be made that the internet has kind of made us devolve in many aspects. One of them being communication.
Well, I mean, we've got modern caveman drawings, emojis.
they went through their own evolution, right? Like you see people that actually speak in purely emojis.
That's what cavemen did. I'm just saying.
Yeah, and you're not wrong. Yeah, it's like I think just overall we just really have to have a little bit more empathetic, because it's not really so much about like, oh well, we're giving them a voice. No, it's really just you could be at peace of mind. Like, the less stuff you snap at, the better it is for you overall. Like, and
And
again, go back to like, well, you're exchanging ideas. Don't see it as a way of like, oh, I'm gonna win, or oh, I don't want to lose. I'm like, no, you're just exchanging ideas. Like, it's up to you. At the end of the day, you can only make the decision for what's best for you,
yeah,
and that's all that matters.
and I think that's a good piece of advice for people. Two things: don't go on the internet trying to own somebody. I know it's real fun to get on there and make someone look like a fool, but at the same time, you're not enhancing your life any. And then the other thing is, don't take so much stock into what people are accomplishing on the internet. Example, I look at your Instagram page and you've got over 3,000 followers. Way to go. I love it. I've got 300. Now, I can do one of two things. I can either be super jealous and try to run you down, or I can congratulate you and tell you you're doing a good job. You're doing a great job. And I'm happy that you are doing so well with something that you love and you're putting time and effort into. I think as a society we need to learn how to congratulate people a little bit more and take what you're seeing and go, okay, obviously he's doing something better than me. What can I do to improve myself?
Yeah, I mean, because like when you look at like different algorithms and different social media platforms, they really just like, that's kind of why like we need to kind of like really mentally fortify ourselves, because when you look at like a social media platform, and it's now scientifically proven. I don't know if it's just a now thing or if it's always been this way, where it's like anger, those type of emotions, like things that tend to be negative in excess, they are what drive the most amount of views for whatever reason, because you either love that they, like you said, they're owning somebody, or are offended because they're trying to own you or something. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think a lot of that, like the more you feed into that, the more it poisons yourself. And at the end of the day, you may be presented with the fact, and now it's like, well, no, because they're just trying to own me. Like, no, 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 no. I'm not putting any of my opinion behind it. It's just the actual fact. I mean, now, like, again, attributing it to the short attention spans that we're basically seeing nowadays. A lot of times when people don't necessarily want to read an article anymore, they want to see a video. Sometimes you can't really show what the article is saying, especially from a historical sense. And even then, you have people that see the video and they just think, oh, this is just this propaganda or this whatever. And
Yeah.
it's like we're looking at like headlines, but then we don't necessarily do the research ourselves.
And that's why I appreciate what you're doing so much. You're given a long conversation platform to issues like mental health and the internet and all that stuff. Where not necessarily where you're trying to come up with solutions that are going to help everybody, but you're just getting these conversations out in the open. And I think that's something that's very important in today's time.
Yeah, and I don't claim that I know everything about mental health. I'm thinking this may really attribute to deterioration of mental health. Like, and there's certain things where I'm like, I'm confident that they are the way they are. Doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not open to new information that might oppose that particular stance. But like, I mean, the whole reason why this started was just to basically highlight different things that affect mental health that not a lot of people know about. Like having conversations, like like not being offended by certain conversations, whether it really whether it's something that you're trying to avoid or trying to like adopt or anything like that. Like it's a lot of it is just like it, because like what you said, like it's done anonymously on the internet. It's so easy to get into that, because it's like, oh, I don't think this person's ever gonna find me, so screw this person, f this, f that, you're a piece of crap and all that stuff.
When I was in high school, you get busted in the mouth for doing that kind of stuff. Now, not to condone physical violence, but there were clear consequences to saying bad things about people.
Yeah, that's kind of yeah. You know what? And like the best experience I learned young was that if you punch somebody, they will punch you back.
Consequences for actions.
Yeah, but again, we're not condoning physical violence. It's just that's just it is what it is, really.
It's
what it
physics.
was.
It's physics. Every action has an equal but opposite reaction.
Right.
People need to understand that. And Tyson's got a great line. I mean, people. What's Mike Tyson? What's his line about getting punched in the mouth?
Everybody thinks they're the best until they get punched in the face or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah?
Exactly.
I'm paraphrasing, but like I think it's something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, you can sum up the whole situation in we've been conditioned to think that we're individually infallible, that we're all right, and we're never wrong, and that it's a good thing to put someone in their place. And sometimes that's not the best way to do it. Sometimes doing what we do, having a conversation, is the only way to work out some of these problems.
Yeah, and like if honestly, like I think it's very important that we learn how to converse with one another because of our mental health. Because again, like you understand somebody, and sometimes at the end of the day, once you understand, I'm like, okay, well, I don't necessarily agree with their standpoint, but their experience is their experience. Then now let's go have a beer or something, or let's just talk about something else like sports or anything else, really, like
or hunting or catching big bass or whatever.
Yeah, or whatever, like whatever anybody feels like. And I think, I mean, growing up, I mean, it was a lot easier to get along with people than it is now. Like now it's like, well, show me that you don't do this, or show me that,
who'd you vote for?
Yeah, and that kind of stuff is really, really toxic. Like it really is toxic. It's just not only like your own mental health, but like you make it harder for the interaction to take place. So like if you do have a good idea, how are you going to spread it? If you automatically come off confrontational,
whether you have an R or a D next to your name, what's it really matter?
Yeah, and it doesn't really matter, right? So it's like, but case in point, like
we're all people. That's what it boils down to. Treat each other nice. Try not to get wrapped up in being the ultimate internet master. Just chill for a little bit. That's all it takes.
Yep, honestly, and just kind of like I said, like we were talking about way in the beginning of the podcast, like find different things that are therapeutic, like gardening, that can serve a dual purpose. Like if you garden, you can plant food, different things like that, and like just research different things. And there's the another thing too is just like when we research stuff, we got to understand too that it may not always be that way forever.
Yep.
Some of the concept might come in and might change things. We see that a lot in science all the time. So we just got to take it, everything with a grain of salt and just kind of enjoy the little things.
Yep. And to go ahead and plug myself, and we'll go ahead and wrap things up. If you're interested in gardening or anything like that, stay in touch with 12 Hike Challenge on Instagram and 12 Hike on Facebook, because my co-host is going to be doing his raised bed gardening this year. He's going to document that. Myself, I'm going to be doing some big game hunting this year, so I hope to do some wilderness to table stuff. I'm going to go through and talk about the ethics of hunting, how to cleanly kill an animal, process an animal, and then I'm going to start doing some wilderness recipes. I hope to do that. And then I'm always fishing, so we're going to be doing some some angling recipes, trout, panfish, stuff like that. And I want to document this whole process this year and really show people and kind of give them an idea of what it's like to really go out and do the things that we do.
Yep, that's perfect. I mean, yeah, I was gonna say, like, make sure you mentioned where everybody can find you and where your next big plans are, and all that stuff. But the
podcast, as far as that goes, every Wednesday, new episodes. This Wednesday coming up, we've got he's an urban angler, so he does strictly like urban fishing. So he'll go to downtown parks. He went out to California and fished the LA River. So I guess it's basically just a concrete river.
Yeah.
And he loves to target carp. So that was a super interesting conversation. And in all that, he also cleans up the rivers. So he'll take old used tennis rackets and turn them into fishing nets. And they do river sweeps all year. So I'm starting to focus on people like that. I'm also going to start doing once a month, I'll highlight either a national or a state park. And my first one's going to be the Everglades National Park. And that should come out in the 1st of April. So that's kind of what's going on.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely. I mean, anybody that still is listening and watching, like, you can always find me at New Age Alchemist. It's just like how it sounds, New Age and Alchemist, all one word. Currently on Instagram only and on YouTube, but that's where these. I mean, for those that are listening and not watching it on YouTube already, that's where you can see the video. And yeah, so my only last thought really is just to make sure that we continue to better ourselves and basically just kind of live life enjoying the small little things to make sure that we are enhancing our mental health and not deteriorating it.
I couldn't say it any better myself.
Cool. All right, Zach, well, thank you for coming on, and so we'll talk to you soon, and hopefully you can come back next time and share one of your panfish recipes.
Plan on it, man. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, awesome.
All right, see ya.
That's good. See ya.